because of the EU's application of elements within the protocol. I wholeheartedly support the Minister's efforts in attempting to remedy the situation, but if these are unsuccessful, will he confirm that all measures, including revoking Article 16, remain on the table?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. The government has been absolutely clear that we want to find a sustainable and durable solution to the problems created by the protocol. And under my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister's strong leadership and Lord Frost's unrivalled grasp of this, we are determined to reach that.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wouldn't the best way by far to support East-West trade and to overcome the entirely self-inflicted wounds that have been created by this government with the protocol? Would the best way not to achieve both objectives not be to simply realign with the single market and the customs union?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's so 2016, isn't it? The SNP benches still are not reconciled to the democratic decision that the British people took to control their own destiny and leave the European Union. We are determined to find a sustainable and durable solution to the protocol, but my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, Lord Frost and the Secretary of State are all clear that if that cannot be achieved, we will take whatever actions are necessary to secure the interests of the whole United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Final question, Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Irish Times carries a piece that the Republic of Ireland now has the highest debt in all of Europe, that it's the 20% higher costs of living than the people in Northern Ireland, and now requires a multi-billion-pound bailout from Europe to deal with the consequences of Brexit for the Republic of Ireland. Isn't it the case that, by contrast, Northern Ireland is part of the 5th largest economy of the world, that is part of not only a strong and growing economy, but that it requires the friction that exists between businesses in Northern Ireland and GB to be removed? Therefore, invoking Article 16 will allow for that friction to be removed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I say to the honourable gentleman, we don't need any international comparisons to sell the benefits of Northern Ireland being an integral part of our United Kingdom. It's good for jobs, it's good for health, it's good for prosperity. We are definitely better together.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British... Mr McNeill, I don't need any help from you. This is an important message to those people who are watching. Before I come to the Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on the Parliament Live TV. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Nicola Richards.
Mr. Speaker, may I begin by saying that I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip. And, Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives. But I repeat, Mr. Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. But I have asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish all the facts and to report back as soon as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that if those rules were broken, then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Nicola Richards.
Mr. Speaker, Speaker, bins left uncollected, council tenants being forced to live in damp and cold homes, £22 million lost on Providence Place land deal and a £10 million overspend on SEND transport contracts which were almost awarded to Labour councillors' friends. Today the council's external auditors released a damning report that surprises none of us. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that 47 years of Labour control in Sandwell has done nothing but level down my constituency of West Bromwich East, and that my constituents in West Bromwich, Friar Park and Great Park deserve better?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, because the instinct of Labour councillors up and down this country is yet again to level down rather than to level up. And I encourage her constituents to install a Labour council there as soon as possible, a Conservative council there as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard what the Prime Minister said at the beginning of this session, but frankly it raises more questions than answers. Last week, I asked the Prime Minister, was there a Christmas party in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th? The Prime Minister, the government, spent the week telling the British public there was no party. All guidance was followed completely. Millions of people now think the Prime Minister was taking them for fools and that they were lied to. They're right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman probably missed what I said at the beginning, but I apologise. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that. But I repeat what I have said to him, that I've been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken.
Order. And right, well, let's just do a little less, Prime Minister. It's important.
Speaker, ask the Cabinet Secretary to investigate exactly what happened, and I repeat that there will be consequences for those involved if those rules were broken, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
An internal investigation into what happened. The situation is as clear as day. I thought last week was... Mr. Speaker, I thought last week was bad enough. Surely the Prime Minister isn't now going to start pretending that the first he knew about this was last night. Surely.
He's in his own house.
We've all watched the video of the Prime Minister's staff, including his personal spokesperson. They knew there was a party. They knew it was against the rules. They knew they couldn't admit it. And they thought it was funny. It's obvious what happened. Anton Decker ahead of the Prime Minister on this. The Prime Minister has been caught red-handed. Why doesn't he end the investigation right now by just admitting it?
Because, Mr. Speaker, I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken, Mr. Speaker, and they may not. I understand public anxiety about this, and I understand public indignation. But there is a risk of doing a grave injustice to people who are frankly obeying the rules, Mr. Speaker. That is why the Cabinet Secretary will be conducting an investigation, and that's why there will be the requisite disciplinary action if necessary.
Keir Starmer.
This pretends that further information's come to light. Give me a break. He's still taking the public for fools. On the day of the Downing Street party, Tricia Greenhall's mum phoned her. She was breathless and feverish. You might want to listen. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit her mum. Listening? 4 days later, on the day the Prime Minister's staff laughed about covering up the party, Tricia's mum was admitted to hospital. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit. Tricia's mum spent Christmas Day in hospital. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit. 2 days later, Tricia's mum died. What Tricia wants to know is this: why did the Prime Minister expect her to accept that the rules allowed a Downing Street party but didn't allow her to visit her dying mother?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the first thing to say is that, in common with everybody in this House, I extend my sympathies to the family of Tricia, and of course I understand to Tricia and her family, and I understand the pain of everybody who has suffered throughout this pandemic. And I know that that the implication that he is trying to draw, that the case that we're now investigating somehow should undermine public confidence in the measures that we're taking. I think that's the point that he's trying to make. But I may say to him, Mr. Speaker, I think it is a great mistake to try to play politics with this issue. And I think that is what he is doing. I think that is what he is doing. And the public, Mr. Speaker, will not like to see, I don't think the public do want to see confidence in their measures, in these measures undermined. And we are taking, I think they can see the difference, Mr. Speaker. We are taking the steps necessary to protect the public, above all, Mr. Speaker, by rolling out the vaccinations, and rather than focusing on the events of a year ago, Mr. Speaker, that is what we are focusing on, and that is what I think the public will understand.
Keir Starmer.
But it's not just the events of a year ago, is it? We are facing a new variant. Yep. We may well be in Plan B this afternoon. Even the Prime Minister, must understand the damage he's done to his credibility in enforcing the rules now and in the future. Exactly. Tricia made an enormous personal sacrifice to do the right thing, to follow the rules and help defeat the virus. That's what she was asked to do. Most people were just like Tricia last Christmas. No one was dreaming of a Zoom Christmas, turkey dinners for one, gifts exchanged at service stations. But the virus was out of control. 489 people died of COVID on the day of the Downing Street party. So the British people put the health of others above themselves and followed the rules. Isn't the Prime Minister ashamed that his Downing Street couldn't do the same?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said about the events on December the 18th. They will be properly investigated, and Mr. Speaker, I will place a copy of the Cabinet Secretary's report in the library of the House of Commons. But what people should not do is lose focus on what we are trying to do now. Rather than, of course, we will deal with the events of what may or may not have taken place on the 18th of December last year, Mr. Speaker. But what I think we need to focus on today is what we're doing to roll out the vaccinations across this country, and what we're doing to protect the public. And he is indeed right, Mr. Speaker, that we now have in the Omicron variant, a variant that is spreading much faster, Mr. Speaker, than any variant that we've seen before, and that is what we need, with great respect to the right honourable gentleman, to focus on. And that is why I ask everybody to go and get their booster jab as soon as they're called forward.
Starmer.
The Prime Minister apparently wants us to focus on what's happening today. There were no government spokespersons on the media this morning. I see the Health Secretary has made it to the Chamber. And that's the point, Mr. Speaker. This virus isn't defeated. We're going to face other tests where the British people may be asked by their leaders to make further sacrifices for the greater good. Her Majesty the Queen sat alone when she marked the passing of the man she'd been married to for 73 years. Leadership, sacrifice, that's what gives leaders the moral authority to lead. Does the Prime Minister think he has the moral authority to lead and to ask the British people to stick to the rules?
Not only that, Mr. Speaker, but the Labour Party and the Labour leader in particular have played politics, Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic.
I've got to hear what the Prime Minister is saying, because if I don't know when something is said, and I must hear the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and if I may say so, throughout this pandemic, the Leader of the Opposition in particular has done nothing but play politics to try to muddy the waters, to confuse the public and to cause needless confusion about the guidance. The public, Mr. Speaker, have not been so confused and they have not been fooled. And they have got on with implementing the guidance, and they have got on in particular, Mr. Speaker, with showing great commitment to the health of this country by going forward to get vaccinated.
Order. Prime Minister. Mr. Streeting, we've had this the week before. I'm not having this every week. No, if you want to be on the front bench, behave like you're meant to be there. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at every stage, the Labour leadership and the Labour right honourable gentlemen have tried to muddy the waters and to play politics, whereas the people of this country have not been fooled. And in particular, they have come forward to get vaccinated faster than any other country in Europe. We've now done 20 million boosters, Mr. Speaker. That is the single best thing that we can do, and I encourage everybody to keep going and get their booster jab.
Keir Starmer.
That's so desperate, and even his own side can see it. Last week, the Prime Minister told us there was no party. Now he thinks there's something to investigate. The Justice Secretary thinks that the police don't investigate crimes from a year ago. Well, I ran the Crown Prosecution Service, and I can tell him that is total nonsense. Mr. Speaker, at Westminster Magistrates Court, right now, the CPS are prosecuting over a dozen breaches of COVID restrictions last December, including those, Prime Minister, who hosted parties. They're doing their job, enforcing the law set in Downing Street. Will the Prime Minister support the police and support the CPS by handing over everything the government knows about parties in Downing Street to the Metropolitan Police?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we will do that, and we will get on with the investigation by the Cabinet Secretary. Mr. Speaker, he continually wants to play politics with this issue. We want to get on with our job of protecting this country during the pandemic, and, Mr. Speaker, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, fighting the drugs gangs, Mr. Speaker, when the party opposite wants to decriminalise Class A drugs, Mr. Speaker, and backing our borders bill, Mr. Speaker. They have an opportunity to focus on that tonight. Why not back our borders bill, Mr. Speaker, and have life sentences for people traffickers? That's what the Leader of the Opposition should be doing. That's what I urge you, rather than playing politics.
Fiona Bruce.
Yeah.
As we celebrate the advent of Christmas, I thank the Prime Minister for his support for Christians and those of other faiths and beliefs who face persecution across the world. We here stand with them. The government has talked about the gift of resettlement for Afghans who are members of religious minorities, of those at risk of persecution, targeted for their beliefs. Will this gift of resettlement be available by the end of Christmas?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much for everything that she does, particularly as a Special Envoy for freedom of religion and belief. As she rightly says, we have an Afghan citizens resettlement scheme coming. We've already taken 15,000, but it's important that we get that scheme right, Mr. Speaker, and further details, including the eligibility criteria, will be announced in due course by the Home Office.
I now call the Leader of the SNP, Ian Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are standing on the cliff edge of yet another challenging moment in this pandemic. Omicron cases are rising at a rapid rate over the coming weeks. Tough decisions will again have to be made to save lives and protect our NHS. Mr. Speaker, trust in leadership is a matter of life and death. Downing Street wilfully broke the rules and mocked the sacrifices we have all made, shattering the public's trust. The Prime Minister is responsible for losing the trust of the people. He can no longer lead on the most pressing issue facing these islands. The Prime Minister has a duty, the only right and moral choice left to him. It is for his resignation. When can we expect it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the party opposite, and indeed the other party opposite, are going to continue to play politics. I am going to get on with the job.
Ian Blackford.
No dignity from a Prime Minister that quite simply just doesn't get it. Mr. Speaker, people across these islands have followed the rules, even when it meant missing friends and family, missing births, missing funerals, missing the chance to be beside a loved one in their dying moments. People have sacrificed, at times to the point of breaking, while the UK government has laughed in our faces. It is clear that this Prime Minister has lost the support of the public and now even his own benches. This is not a grin and bear it moment. This is a moment of moral reckoning. Every member of the Conservative benches must now decide, is this the man to lead these islands when lives are at stake? It is clear that this Prime Minister intends to desperately cling on to power, and I have nothing left to say to a man whose answers we simply can't trust. So, Mr. Speaker,
Order. I will hear this question, whether the front bench like it or not. Can I just say, I'm expecting better behaviour. The public out there are questioning this Parliament. Don't add to that question. Ian Blackford.
Questioning this Parliament and questioning this Prime Minister that we cannot trust. It is clear that the Prime Minister desperately is clinging on to power, and I've got nothing left to say to a man who we simply cannot trust. So, Mr. Speaker, it is time for members in this House to act. If he doesn't resign, then he must be removed.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his vote of support and thanks, vote of confidence. But I can tell him that I am going to get on with the job, and I believe that that is what is the right thing to do. And I think it is very, very sad that when the public need to hear clarity from their officials and from politicians, the parties opposite are trying to muddy the waters about events or non-events of a year ago, Mr. Speaker, and that is what they are doing today.
We now have a closed question. Bob Seeley.
Number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, who is an excellent champion for the Isle of Wight, and I know there is ongoing discussion between Isle of Wight and the Department for Levelling Up about the unique circumstances of the island, including the discussions about the possibility of a county deal.
Bob Seeley.
I thank the Prime Minister for his response. Will the government accept the findings of the independent study that it itself commissioned this summer into a long-term, fair funding settlement for the island, the final calculations of which are due imminently? And in doing so, will he help me to right a wrong which has been ongoing now for the island, for my constituents, for some 6 decades? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much. He will understand it's not easy to break down the costs that apply to the service delivery on the island, but I know the Department is carefully considering the details of the study he mentions, and I'm sure the relevant minister will keep him updated.
Sir Geoffrey Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In view of the harm caused to political stability in Northern Ireland and to our economy by the Northern Ireland Protocol, noting the lack of progress in removing the Irish Sea border and recognising that Unionist consent for the Protocol is not forthcoming, what urgent steps does the Prime Minister and his government intend to take to honour his commitment to restore Northern Ireland's place fully within the UK internal market and to safeguard the political institutions in Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, and he and I have discussed this extensively, and he knows that we share a view that the protocol is not working in the way that it needs to in order to guarantee the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I don't believe things need to be that way. I think it could be worked differently, and we want our EU friends and partners to understand that, and we will continue to work with them to get them to see things in the way that people on both sides of the Irish Sea see them. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we do not remove the possibility of invoking Article 16 to protect trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, thousands of my Hindu constituents and millions worldwide start the birth centenary celebrations of the birth of His Holiness Pramukhswami Maharaj. His life was given over to people of all castes, races and religions. He was, of course, the inspiration behind the world-renowned Neasden Temple and hundreds of other temples. Will my right honourable friend join me in joining that celebration and giving good wishes to all Hindus across the world?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and I was delighted, and I thank the Hindu community for their amazing contribution to this country. I was delighted to visit Neasden Temple last month and to hear about all they've done during the pandemic, and I wish everybody in that community and all those celebrating all the very best.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chaos of this government is a distraction from the serious decisions it should be taking. We all know that the Chinese government denies basic human rights to China's minority religious communities. The repression of the predominantly Muslim Uyghur population in Xinjiang has been condemned as an act of genocide. In the face of these abuses, President Biden has decided US diplomats will boycott the Beijing Olympics. New Zealand and Australia have followed suit. It's International Human Rights Day on Friday, so will the Prime Minister raise his eyes from his chaos and commit the UK to joining the diplomatic boycott, or does his desperation for trade deals trump human rights?
No, Mr. Speaker, because we make all those points regularly to the Chinese, and indeed I did to President Xi when I talked to him recently. As I've said before, we do not support sporting boycotts, but there are no plans for ministers, certainly no plans for ministers to attend the Winter Olympics.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents in Sleaford and North Hykeham are struggling to access an NHS dentist, leading to pain and suffering, in particular for children, military families and veterans. My right honourable friend has invested a record amount of money in the NHS. Does he agree with me that some of this money must be used to level up dental care provision? Does he share my surprise that there is no dental school in the East Midlands, and will he back my campaign for a dental school in Lincolnshire?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know that Health Education England are working extensively in Lincolnshire to improve the recruitment and retention of dentists. I understand that they agree with her about the uneven distribution of dental schools throughout the country, and I'm sure as they consider their next steps, they will have heard her appeal.
Mary Kelly Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Storm Arwen left thousands of people in Bear Park, Ludworth, Sherburn and Waterhouses without heating or electricity. Yet it took 5 days for a ministerial statement to be made and a week to send in the army. My constituents weren't just left without power, they were left without a government that cares. Can the Prime Minister look me in the eye and honestly say that he did everything he could as soon as he could to help the people of Durham?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell her that I was in contact with representatives of the local authorities, of the Army, of Northern Power Grid and others to see what more we could do to assist them in restoring power, and I sympathise very much with the families who lost power for an unconscionably long period, Mr. Speaker, and the House will have heard the explanation of the various electricity companies about why that was so. We must learn the lessons from storms Arwen and Barra and make sure nothing like that happens again.
David Warburton.
Mr. Speaker, I know we'll all agree that our vaccination programme has been a tremendous success. Vaccinations are the front line of defence against all variants of COVID, and the booster jab is a vital component of this. But in rural areas like mine, our booster centres are often few and very far between, and 2/3 of housebound people, those perhaps most vulnerable, most susceptible and most in need, haven't yet received their booster. So can I ask my right honourable friend what steps the government's taking to ensure more centres are available, particularly in rural areas, and would he ask the Health Secretary to meet me with some urgency to ensure my constituents can get their boosters and stay protected this winter?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, amongst the heroes of the vaccine rollout are, of course, pharmacists, as he rightly says, up and down the country, and we have 1,500 community pharmacies vaccinating people near where they live. I know that the NHS are considering the need to support more pop-up clinics where there's a need. I'm happy to arrange a meeting with him and the Vaccines Minister to discuss this further.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the booster vaccines are essential in our fight against COVID. Speaking to clinical colleagues, one of the biggest hindrances is the 15 minutes people have to wait post-Pfizer. If we could reduce that or take that away, it could release thousands of hours of clinicians' time. So will the Prime Minister ask the MHRA and the JCVI to look to see if it is safe to do so, particularly for those people receiving their third Pfizer booster?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and I can tell him that we are in the process of reviewing the 50-minute waiting requirement for both booster doses, and we continue to be guided by the JCVI and the MHRA.
Catherine Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are having to resort to DIY dentistry, including performing DIY dentistry on their own children. Money, not anything has been allocated to NHS dentistry. So can the Prime Minister explain why my constituents cannot access an NHS dentist?
Prime Minister.
I thank her, but we're putting record funding into the NHS, including into NHS dentistry. And if she'd like to write to me with the cases that she mentions, I'd be happy to take it up with the Secretary of State for Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, the Prime Minister has spoken, I know, to primary-aged children about careers and the opportunities that are ahead of them. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that every child should have the chance to meet adults from different professions, different backgrounds, to be inspired for the future, and that this could play a major part in delivering the Levelling Up agenda?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend, and it's absolutely true that throughout our career strategy, we've invested so far £2 million to support career-related learning in primary schools, and as anybody in this House will know, you get the most extraordinary questions from primary schools children, and they are often very, very ambitious for their futures.
Jane Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, Jane wrote from Erdington. Her father, Vince, died of COVID. 5 days later, her sister died of COVID. She is devastated and appalled at recent revelations as to what has gone on in Downing Street. She asks this question of the Prime Minister: does trust in British politics matter?
Yes, it does, Mr. Speaker, and that's why it's so absolutely vital that, of course, we should get to the bottom of whatever may or may not have taken place on the 18th of December last year, but we need to focus on what's happening this year, Mr. Speaker, and I urge her and everybody else to get their booster jab and to look after themselves.
Mr. Speaker, at the moment, indecent exposure or flashing is illegal offline, but not online. I really welcome my right honourable friend's support for that to change when he spoke to the Liaison Committee in November. Will he support outlawing cyber flashing and other forms of sexual image abuse online in the forthcoming online safety bill when it comes to this House?
I thank my right honourable friend, and she's right to draw attention to that phenomenon of cyber flashing, and it is one of the issues that is being addressed by my right honourable friend in the Online Harms Bill.
John McNulty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year I asked the Prime Minister what progress had been made delivering his pledge to buy 4,000 ZEBs by 2024. The budget and the spending review confirmed the UK Government planned investment will not reach that target. As Vice Chair of the Bus, Coach and APPG, let me tell the Prime Minister, bus manufacturers have no orders from his Zebra scheme. Production lines in Falkirk, Ballymena and Scarborough desperate to start orders and deserve better than this. Prime Minister, why is your government failing to deliver these orders and that pledge?
Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to delivering 4,000 zero-emission buses, and we're also committed to supporting UK bus manufacturing.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has already been asked about the Winter Olympics, but listening to his answer, I have to say, sadly, I think it is not at all strong enough. May I support the request that the UK government now acts against this dictatorial, brutal Chinese regime that is persecuting everybody from Christians through to Tibetans and terrorising the Uyghurs. Would the British government follow suit to the Americans, the Australians, even the Lithuanians, and please, please, I beg of him, give a lead for human rights and make a diplomatic boycott of these Olympic Games?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was clear from what I said earlier on that the government has no hesitation in raising these issues with China, as I did with President Xi the last time I talked to him, and there will be effectively a diplomatic boycott of the of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. No ministers are expected to attend. What I think the House and no officials, Mr. Speaker, but what I can tell the House is that I do not think that sporting boycotts are sensible, and that remains the policy of the government.
Douglas Chapman.
The Prime Minister will be aware of the recent National Audit Office report on bounce-back loans and eye-watering levels of fraud and criminality uncovered. In the interest of the taxpayer, will the Prime Minister initiate a Great British Bounce-Back Fraud Squad to recover this public money and prosecute where appropriate, even if the crime was committed more than a year ago?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we will take action against anybody who's defrauded any of the COVID loans, bounce-back loans or otherwise.
William Ragg.
Mr. Speaker, there are media reports of a Cabinet meeting and press conference this afternoon to initiate COVID Winter Plan B without reference to this House. COVID passes will not increase uptake of the vaccine, but will create a segregated society. Is my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, aware that very few will be convinced by this diversionary tactic?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no decisions will be taken without consulting the Cabinet.
Alan Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This country is angry, and understandably so. Last Christmas, while we were in lockdown, millions of people were unable to be with their families. Thousands of people waved through their care home windows at loved ones, wishing them a Merry Christmas from the side of the road. People died without that last touch from their daughters, their sons, their wives. Working in intensive care, I wept behind my mask as 3 children, talking to their dying mother on an iPad, begged her to wake up. Countless children now growing up without parents, while parties were held at number 10. Mr. Speaker, this is disgraceful. This is an insult to everyone who followed the rules. It is an insult to everyone who wasn't allowed to say their final goodbye. This happened on the Prime Minister's watch. So my question is very simple. How does the Prime Minister sleep at night?
Mr. Speaker, I want to say, first of all, I want to repeat what I've said earlier on about what happened last year, a year ago, but or what may not have happened. But I want to say this. I share and understand her grief and her feelings. I thank her for her service in the NHS. And, Mr. Speaker, I know how much this country has been through, and I know how difficult it has been through. And if you ask me how I sleep at night, well, the answer is, of course, I take full responsibility and personal responsibility for everything that this government has done. But I must say to you, Mr. Speaker, and I say to the House, the way forward for this House, for this country now, is to focus on the position we are in. and above all, to get our vaccinations as fast as we possibly can. We're in a much better position this year than we were last year, and that is thanks to the vaccination rollout, and I urge every member of this House to join that campaign and that great British vaccination effort.
There's lots of points of order. I'll take the Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have informed the Prime Minister that I would be making a point of order. I was informed by the government front bench that he had to go. My goodness, I think those of us on this side of the House absolutely agree that he has to go. He has to go as Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, people throughout these islands have been watching this debate today. People feel revulsion at the stories that have emerged, in particular the video last night. What is worse, Prime Minister? What is worse, Mr. Speaker, is that there are now authoritative reports of not just one, not just two, but 3 different Downing Street parties during lockdown last Christmas, including one, Mr. Speaker, in the Prime Minister's flat. What do we have to do on this side of the House to make sure that the Prime Minister takes responsibilities for his breach of trust, for the breach of COVID regulations, and he does the right thing on behalf of all the people of all these islands, and he resigns now?
I think I made that decision. No, I know you're not, and it's not to me, obviously. Can I just say, it is a very tense moment for the House, and I just want to try and calm it down. What I would say is that we can't continue a debate after it's already gone on. What I would say is I am not aware of any media attention, but I can also say it is not for me to rule on something that happens in Downing Street. What I would say is you've got it on the record, and I think we're going to leave it at that. Point of order, Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Standards has issued its 4th report of this session, which makes a number of proposals and recommendations, some open for consultation. As one of the longer-standing MP members of the committee, some colleagues in this House, cross-party, have approached me seeking guidance. It's become apparent to me, Mr. Speaker, that many colleagues are unaware of the existing practices and processes of the Standards Committee and the Code, let alone understanding those changes that are proposed. The committee is keen to ensure full consultation, and its chairman and team is doing a good job on encouraging members to take part. With that in mind, I've checked Erskine May and spoken to some senior colleagues and asked whether it would be appropriate for me to offer a meeting or meetings for colleagues across this House to listen to them, for them to take part in the consultations and propose recommendations, always with a view to emphasising my views and listening and strongly encouraging colleagues to participate and express their views in this process. The consultation, Mr. Speaker, runs until 20th of January. I understand it is entirely in order and permitted. Could you confirm, Mr. Speaker, that you would encourage colleagues across the House to take part in this important consultation process?
What I would say is I would encourage all members to take part in the consultation process that's been launched. What I would say is it's certainly not a point of order for me. I think what you've done is a point of clarification for the House. We're straight. Sorry. Is it further to that point? Oh, right. We're straight. Come on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, have you been notified by the government of their intention to make a statement today from the Department for Health and Social Care? Because if media reports are to be believed, there will be a Cabinet meeting this afternoon, followed by a Downing Street press conference to announce the introduction of new restrictions. Mr. Speaker, you've made it clear in the past that statements should be heard here first. And I want to say, further to what the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's questions, despite what he said to the Leader of the Opposition, this party, on these benches, have always put public health before party politics, which is why we have voted with them time and again. Do not abuse that trust in the way that the public trust has been abused. We will always put public health first, but we expect that announcement to be made here.
Can I first of all say I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of the point of order. I can confirm that I've had no request from the government to make a statement. Of course, I am open, as soon as the government wishes to come forward, to say that it is going to make a statement. I will say to the government, I repeatedly and continue to repeat that it must be here for backbenchers, whether government or opposition, to hear it in this chamber. This chamber is where statements are made. It goes against the ministerial code. I don't want to fall out with the Prime Minister, but it is not a good way of getting Christmas cards between us, because I take it and find it very, very offensive. And I would say now, there is plenty of time for the government to come forward to say that it will make a statement here. What I do not want is statements to be made outside. I want the respect of this House. I expect government to make sure they respect their own backbenchers, because I do if he doesn't. So I would say this is a chance for all to make sure this House hears it first. I hope, with my voice, they shall be able to hear it now in Downing Street, because I will make sure that they do. So please, let us not take this House for granted. And I stand firmly behind all the members of this House that it must be here first. Sorry, we're going through them. Sorry. Florence Session-Lumley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 3rd of November, I raised the tragic case of my constituent's mother, who sadly died by suicide, and the Prime Minister agreed to meet with me. Mr. Speaker, how best can I get that meeting? Because essentially the Prime Minister is now refusing to meet with me.
What I can say is I will write to the Prime Minister to remind him that he did promise to have a meeting with you. I will pass on those remarks, and I'm sure the front bench will have heard it as well. And I would say, when people do make statements they will meet, they should honour that. All members of this House count. All members matter. Sorry, where are we going to go? Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And further to the point of order from the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, successive government ministers have promised that vaccine passports will not be introduced without the prior approval of this House. But yet it is reported today that they are going to do exactly that. What can you do, Mr. Speaker, to protect the position of this House and to ensure that government ministers keep the promises they have made to it?
First of all, I don't want to continue a debate we've already answered to. What I would say is I expect and I know that your voice will be heard, and it's certainly on the record. Right, Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just need your clarity, if I may, on a point of procedure. Earlier, the Leader of the Opposition invoked Her Majesty the Queen in the political exchange. And I thought there was guidance.
Order. No, I'm not going to even enter into that. If you look at yesterday's order paper, you will find that someone from the other side did. It was in passing and not part of the text. Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, further to the points made about the need for the government to come to this House if it has anything to announce today, would you exceptionally permit the use of the urgent question procedure if there isn't a statement offered, so that we could put down an urgent question this afternoon for answer today?
So I will be very willing to look if it's feasibly possible to see if we could use a UQ if there is a way round the rules, because I'd be more than willing to accept if the government wasn't willing to come forward with a statement. I totally agree. A statement would be beneficial. As I say, I'm sure Downing Street wouldn't let the members of this House down. Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And your advice has been very valuable today. I wonder if you could extend it just more to, I feel from my question 6 in Prime Minister's questions that there were some inconsistencies in the reply. I'm wondering, could you please advise me of next steps in managing the matter?
Unfortunately, I'm not responsible for the answers. It's as simple as that, and I certainly don't want to be. Alice Brendan McDale.
Following on indeed from that, Mr. Speaker, and with reports swirling in the last few minutes, in fact, a half hour, would you, Mr. Speaker, accommodate and encourage a statement from the Prime Minister on just how many parties they've had in government buildings and when during the COVID restrictions?
We're not going to extend the debate, and you've been here long enough to know that I'm not going to be tempted by that. Right, no further points of order. No further points of order. I now want to come to the 10-minute rule bill. And I'm going to let members leave before I call the member. 1 second. Please, can we all leave orderly? All right. Yeah, thanks.
I'm sorry for being
Do I know? He is not. Right, let's start with 10-minute rule bill. Paul Howell.
Mr Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to transfer monies from the Dormant Asset Scheme into a new national endowment called the Community Wealth Fund, to be invested for the purposes of improving the local environment and quality of life of deprived communities, including through building social capital and social infrastructure for connected purposes. As the first Conservative MP for Sedgefield since 1931, like so many of my colleagues on this side of the House, I was elected with a mandate to level up every community across the UK. In our first 2 years in office, we've worked tirelessly to level up opportunity, with the Prime Minister announcing a Towns Fund, the Chancellor set out the landmark £4 billion Levelling Up Fund to invest in infrastructure for everyday life, alongside the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to support communities after Brexit. And now we have a department focused on delivering our levelling up mission so that every community across the country can benefit from the policies of this government. Most of the proposals announced so far will help to improve economic fortunes across the UK as we build back better from COVID and meet the challenges of net zero. I know how important investment in physical infrastructure is, and it can be a significant injection of belief in an area. But, as I said earlier this week in my contribution to the second reading of the Dormant Assets Bill, levelling up needs to be much more than that. It's now time to tackle the next frontier of levelling up and rebuild the essential social infrastructure that our communities rely upon. This is because both places and people are important. Research and evidence strongly suggest that places need investment in their social fabric as well as their physical infrastructure, and people need support and resources to nurture and develop the type of relationships that underpin the health and well-being of our communities and of the country as a whole. We've seen the benefits of such strong social connections over the past year as local residents stepped up during the pandemic to protect their communities from the virus, forming mutual aid groups to ensure that vulnerable residents were looked after. And as we move beyond COVID to meet the challenges and look to the future, this community spirit is something we need to build on. This bill seeks to do just that, helping to restore local pride in place through investing in people and in developing their confidence and capacity to build the relationships needed to support people to help take action in their local communities. For our levelling up ambitions to reach every part of the country, it must be in those places where the social fabric is frayed the most. We need a least first approach to levelling up, with investment targeted first at those areas that have the least. It is for this reason that I'm bringing forward this bill in my role as co-chair of the APPG for Left Behind Neighbourhoods, a group supported by 76 members from across both houses. The 225 left behind neighbourhoods that we represent and advocate for are facing severe economic deprivation, as well as significantly lacking in the social infrastructure that is so important to our way of life, but which many of us sometimes take for granted. Those essential community places and spaces for people to meet in a local area. The local activity and engagement with civic life that supports a sense of local ownership and fosters belonging and civic pride. And physical and digital connectivity that is so vital in connecting residents with amenities, services and opportunities. These neighbourhoods that are spread right across the UK, but including Trimdon, Thornley and Ferryhill in my constituency, as research for the APPG has found, face significantly worse outcomes when compared to all other areas, including those that are equally economically deprived, but which at least benefit from a foundation of social infrastructure. The work of our APPG over the last 18 months has made it clear that these neighbourhoods require investments in the politics of belonging. We need to make these neighbourhoods better places to live and grow up in, investing in local talent and opportunities and providing them with the support and resources they need to flourish. Communities thrive when they enjoy a vibrant local civic life, whether that's built around a shared local history, heritage and experience, or important local assets and institutions like a pub, a library, a football club, or a community centre. These cultural and heritage assets, they help create the bonds of trust, cement the relationships and strengthen those ties that bind us to each other and to the places we call home. They underpin our unwritten social covenant, generating trust between people in the places where they live, trust that can be relied upon in times of difficulty. These are the things that local residents understand too. as recent polling from Survation found that 2/3 of residents in left-behind neighbourhoods felt their neighbourhood was missing out on community facilities, with over half saying their area had less resources such as parks, leisure and sports facilities and places to meet. As importantly, almost 60% of residents said they wanted to have more of a say over how future funding in their local area was spent. And when it comes to levelling up a local area, we know that the community is best placed to know what needs to be done. We need to not only listen to local people, but to trust them to take the lead. This means we need to level up by devolving down, to giving communities the confidence and capacity to take action on the issues that matter most to them, as well as the support and access to resources they need to help enable them to improve local outcomes. This is the purpose of the Community Wealth Fund that I set out in this bill today. As we heard in the Chamber on Monday, the expanded dormant assets scheme could be used to provide almost £900 million initially to this fund without any drain on the public purse. I welcome the aims of the Government as set out in the Dormant Assets Bill to broaden the scope of dormant assets as the money is committed to spending on good causes. My bill will ensure that this is a reality, setting up an endowment that supports those places most left behind to design their own futures, achieve greater control over their own destinies and build long-term prosperity. To ensure that this Community Wealth Fund is impactful in transforming left-behind neighbourhoods where previous schemes have not, it must be invested in such a way as to build the social capital of residents whilst delivering visible and tangible benefits to their neighbourhoods. Research by the University of Cambridge looking at the last 40 years of place-based regeneration schemes found the key determinants for driving lasting change included local decision-making, targeted funding at the neighbourhood level and ensuring funding is provided over a long-term period. Recent research for Onward reflects these findings that whilst involvement in communities is essential, many communities require upfront investment in order to participate fully. The Community Wealth Fund would build upon the learning from previous regeneration programmes, support residents to take the lead on making decisions about how it's spent in order to achieve lasting change. This would turbocharge the levels of community confidence and capacity in an area, increasing the stock of social capital and boosting civic pride and the quality of local life. Over the long term, we would expect this investment to pay dividends through the residents' ability to develop longer-term strategies for how they can deliver change and tap into the opportunities on offer across the wider region. The decision on how and where to commit funds must be driven by the significance of the local social impact and not some arbitrary financial return on investment calculations. We must try to reinforce this opportunity by making the approach as relational and as human as possible and remove whatever bureaucracy we can. I welcome the fact that the Government confirmed in the second reading that it is not opposed to considering community wealth funds and that the idea is actively being considered as part of the Levelling Up White Paper discussions.